Hey guys, happy Monday. Do me a favor, if you have your Bibles, be flipping over to Amos chapter 7. We're going to be in verses 12 through 16 before we start the video. And since Amos is kind of hard to find, I'll give you a few minutes. Want to say happy birthday to my dad. I love you. Thank you for all the love and support through all the years. And hopefully these videos are just a small way of making you proud. And I really enjoy and appreciate the support and the love that you've been giving me on these. So as you're flipping over to Amos, a little bit of backstory. Amos was a shepherd, and he was also a fig tree farmer. He lived on the border of Judah and Israel. This is after Israel had split into two kingdoms. So you have Judah and Israel, and Amos lives down here in Judah. And in Israel, King Jeroboam had taken over. And it's kind of an interesting time in the history of Israel because they're growing as a nation and they're growing in riches, and they have a big population of theirs that's growing in wealth, and they're starting to establish some wealth, and they're starting to establish some good land and some good boundaries. But at the time, spiritually, they're not doing so good. Jeroboam was called evil by Amos and by other prophets, and basically you see that they're in a bad position spiritually. Two of the main issues you have two main groups of people that were committing religious treason, basically. The first one, you have the Israelites who had just decided that they just weren't going to worship God any longer. They were going to start worshiping other gods. They thought that's what brought them to where they were, and of course that's very infuriating to God. That's the first commandment, have no other gods before me, and that was what they were doing. The second group of people, it was kind of a more sneaky way of not worshiping. What they were doing was they would go to the temple, they would pray, they would fast, they would worship, but they were living their lives in a way that wasn't according to God's will. So what they were doing was they were overlooking some issues. The poor Israelites were being sold into debt slavery, and to pay off their debts, they were being sold into slavery, and they didn't really have a way to get a foothold, and they didn't really have a way to make a case for themselves. And these rich Israelites were denying legal representation to these poor Israelites. So what they were doing was, if you were to put it kind of in modern parlance, they'd go to church on Sundays and on Wednesdays and maybe Sunday nights, but they weren't living Monday through Friday, Monday through Saturday as a Christian. They had some big issues in their life, and they were proclaiming God, and they were professing God, but they were living their lives in a way that wasn't according to God's will, and it was in fact hurting God's people. And what happens is Amos gets word of this, and he gets called by God, and God says, go to Bethel. And I want you to preach, I want you to prophesy against what the king of Israel is doing. I want you to go up to the king, and I want you to say, hey, what you're doing is wrong. You're not living according to God's will, and we're Israel. We're God's chosen people, and you're not running us like we're that. And you're running us in a negative direction. And what you see in the book of Amos is actually a collection of some of Amos's preaching, some of his poems, some of his prophecy, and it's all put together by various authors, which is kind of what makes Amos an interesting book. It's a book of prophecy that wasn't written by the prophet. It was kind of a greatest hits collection of everything Amos had to say. And you kind of see when we get into chapter 7, Amos reaches some opposition by Amaziah, who is the priest of Bethel, and he's going up to Amos and he's saying, look, stay away. Stop prophesying in Israel, because this is my terrain. This is King Jeroboam's terrain. And ultimately the implication is, if Amos doesn't stop preaching, he's going to be killed by Jeroboam. And we don't see this in the scriptures, but historically we know that King Jeroboam killed Amos. So Amos had this mighty word that was delivered to him from God, and Amos knew what the risks were. Amos knew that he was going up against the buzzsaw, so to speak. He knew that King Jeroboam didn't like what he had to say, and he knew that he was probably going to be put to death for it. But what makes the character of Amos so great is what we're about to read, starting in verse 12. It says, Then Amaziah said to Amos, Go away, you seer, flee to the land of Judah, earn your living, and give your prophecies there. But don't ever prophesy in Bethel again, for it is the king's sanctuary and royal temple. So Amos answered Amaziah, I was not a prophet or the son of a prophet. Rather, I was a herdsman, and I took care of sycamore figs. But the Lord took me from the flock and said to me, Go prophesy to my people in Israel. Now hear the word of the Lord. So what you have is this guy, Amaziah, and he's begging and he's pleading. He's saying, look, just go back. Just make your money. Just go be a farmer. Just go live your humble life. Just don't prophesy here anymore. Like he's kind of, it seems like he's kind of giving him an olive branch and saying, look, just go away and go live your life. It's okay. And Amos is basically, his answer is, look, I wasn't a prophet and I wasn't a son of a prophet. I worked in a field and God called to me and he said, go speak. And if I say no at this point, I'm going against what God called me to do. And I don't care if it's risking my life. I don't care if you don't like it. I don't care if the king doesn't like it and he can kill me on sight. Hear the word of the Lord. I love the way he says that, because he's saying, the Lord said to me, go prophesy to the people, now hear the word of the Lord. And he's not taking it from the perspective of, he's not allowing what's being said to him. He's not allowing the threats to get to him. He's saying, look, now just hear the word, because I'm going to give it to you, because it's my calling. And I took away two things from this. The first thing I took away, God doesn't care about our beginning. And I think that's something that a lot of Christians need to hear and need to realize is, sometimes it's scary to take that leap into ministry or to do something for the kingdom or to do something for God, because we don't think that we're worthy of it because of our beginning. And you look at Amos, and he doesn't come from a sinful beginning or anything like that, but what we see is he wasn't schooled properly as far as ministry is concerned. He wasn't raised in the temple. He wasn't the traditional prophet. Your traditional prophets would be in the temple every day, and they would learn and they would grow and they would understand. But God called someone who had another job as a farmer, who had a humble beginning, and said, look, I need somebody to stand up for me. And by all indications, you're somebody who's going to stand up for me. And that was what Amos's calling was. It wasn't go and blow them away with your biblical knowledge. It was, hey, I need somebody to take a stand. And Amos was willing to take that stand. And that's what God's looking for. God's not looking for people that have all the answers. He's not looking for people that spend every day in church and every day in Bible college and everything like that. But what he's looking for rather are people who are willing to take that stand, and people who are willing to say, I don't care what the circumstances are. I don't care what the threat is. God told me to speak. Here's the word of the Lord. And I think that's something that people today, they don't want to become Christians because they're afraid of who they were and people finding out. And when it talks about it in the New Testament, it says, look, when you become a Christian, you're a new creation. Your ledger is clean. Whoever you were in the past, in God's eyes, you're not that anymore. You're a new person. You're a new creation. So God is just looking for people that are willing to take that stand for him. And the second thing I took away from this, when you look at the whole collection of what Amos is saying, worship doesn't end on Sunday. In modern times, back then it was a little bit different as far as their worship was concerned, but you don't get to coast through your week because you went to church on Sunday and everything be okay. What Christianity really is it's a daily reminder, a daily reclamation of who you are. Jesus says in the New Testament, to be a Christian, you got to take up that cross daily and you got to follow me. It's not going to church once, twice, 3 times a week and then just leaving it at the door and letting everything else progress and letting everything else just go the rest of the week. What true Christianity really is a commitment and buying into what Jesus has to say, buying into the promise that God gave us, and then taking a stand like Amos. So as we go throughout this week, guys, as you're approaching church next Sunday, I want you to think about where you are in life. And I'm going to challenge you, if you're not the most schooled biblical scholar, don't let that stop you from taking a stand for God. Don't let that stop you from whatever plans God has for your life. You saying, no, I can't do it. I'm not ready. I'm not schooled properly. Because here's the facts. Neither was Amos. But what Amos was, he was willing to take a stand for God, and he was willing to die for that stand. So when you think about your lives this week, when you think about what's holding you back, I want you to really approach it from the attitude of Amos and be like, look, I might not have all the answers, but I'm willing to take a stand. I'm willing to see what God has for me. So happy Monday. Love you guys, and I'll see you next week.